Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 4.16, and in this lesson we're going to introduce the concept of mid-side processing. So to do that, I have this little loop going. These really don't match up that well, but that's not important. The important part is what's going to come a little bit later. So let's listen to this back, and I want you to hear that there's a lot of low end, and of course then there's high end in the pad. And if you're not wearing headphones, you should probably put them on just so you can really hear the detail. But I'll also add a little bit of like distortion so that I can get some other higher harmonics going on. Okay, hopefully that helped for some of you who may not have really good headphones or a good monitoring setup. Hopefully you can hear both of these now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I've done a number of times. I'm going to route both of these into audio 3. And I'm going to create a new audio track. I'm going to turn this one up to 0. And I'm going to set the input of this from audio 3 post fader, turn monitoring off, set this up to record. And it helps to record arm the track. And while this is going, the reason why I want a lot of frequency content in my sound here is because when I get into mid-side processing, there's going to be certain things that you might want to do to the mids and certain things you might want to do to the sides, and oftentimes that's very frequency dependent. So we'll talk about that as we go a little bit further, but if you're wondering why I didn't just do this on the bass or why I didn't just do it on the pad, it's because neither the pad or the bass in itself is probably going to need too much mid-side processing. And a lot of times you're going to see mid-side processing done to things like in the mastering process. So they'll take a full track and they'll do a little bit of mid-side processing. For our purposes here, we're just going to take this one little combined synth little part and do some mid-side processing to it. So let's take a listen back to this. Okay, so we can see there's plenty of stuff going on in there. And now let's say you're a mixing engineer, you're a mastering engineer, and somebody just sent you the stems and they sent you the stem like this. There's no way you can pull these out. You can't just pull out the low end. You can't just get the pad part. So you're going to have to make do with this sample. So what do we want to do? Well, maybe we want reverb, maybe we want a delay. The problem with that, especially if it's in a club setting, is that you're going to be getting a lot of delay and reverb on that low end. And we know that lower frequencies take up more space. And so that's what ends up muddying up mixes, is when you add something like reverb and these spatial effects, you know, it already is very difficult for the speaker to pump out those low frequencies, those longer wavelengths to displace the air. And so when you're having to also try to do that with reverb and with delay, it can be very difficult. And so the speaker just isn't efficient. The speaker's not going in and out at like an even rate. And that's why you end up losing low end and why it can sound muddy and not work. So a solution to this would be to attempt to do some processing to this guy in a mid-side configuration. And here's the first way I'm going to show you guys how to do it. I'm going to duplicate the track. So now we're working in some parallel processing. I'll turn both of these down by the same amount. Make sure we're not going into the red. So you can do it by a little bit more, minus 5.06. I want to try to get these exactly the same if I can. Perfect. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tool device. So on audio 1, I'm going to get rid of the span for right now. So on audio 1, I'm going to drop in the tool. And on audio 2, I'm going to drop in the tool. And what you'll notice is we have a width parameter. If I turn the width down to 0, we are effectively working in mono at that point, okay? It's going to take all of this signal, all of the stereo information, and sum it down into mono. So let's take a listen to how that sounds when I do this. And now you can hear a lot of that pad sound going away because that pad is a very stereo sound. And now this audio 1 track is just focused in the center. And I can even take this further by taking an EQ2 and getting rid of some more of that pad sound and just focusing in on the low end. Maybe I'll use... Okay, that's good enough for me. A little bit of bleed, a little bit of overlap is fine. And now with audio 2, I'm actually going to apply the exact opposite process. I'm going to go from 100 up to 200, so we're only hearing the information on the left and the right speakers, and everything in the middle is going away effectively. So let's take a listen to that. And obviously we're still getting a lot of that kick drum sound, which we don't want. So we'll go in here, high pass, and take out some of that if we can. Let's listen to these together, make sure we haven't really screwed anything up too much. Okay, I'm somewhat happy with that. It's not perfect, but it's never going to be perfect when we're kind of doing it manually like this. But now what we have the ability to do is we're going to call this I'm going to call it mono lows because we've taken this, we've converted it to mono, and it's the low end information. And this is going to be called stereo mid highs. So now if I want, I can go in here and I can apply some further processing. So I could maybe put a compressor on here and solo this up. And now maybe I could also add some EQ5 or something. And if I wanted, I could, maybe put a low shelf, add a couple of dBs. And if I wanted, I could really try to dial this in and find some other sounds and settings that sounded good with the EQ. But for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. I could even maybe add in a little bit more distortion if I want. And again, I'm going to actually take this stereo width knob and turn it down quite a bit. But you can see we're still pretty much totally in mono here, just by looking at the faders. All right, so now we have our lows kind of set how we want them to be set, and now we can work with these stereo mid-highs. So maybe I want to send reverb. And now I don't have to worry too much about my width parameters. I can really crank them up, and I shouldn't have to worry about too much low end sneaking through here. I won't even have to use an EQ after the fact to try to control anything, which is pretty handy and cool. And now I can also go in here and I could apply some kind of delay. Add even more space. I'm not really liking the way that sounds, so instead I'm going to put my chorus in front. And I'm actually going to start by adding an other EQ. Okay, so I hope you guys get the idea. We didn't really have a whole lot of high-end information, but the concept in and of itself is not that difficult. What we've done is we've taken a signal, we've split it out, and so we've separated the mids, the mono area, from the stereo information. And when we do that, we can do some additional processing that we otherwise couldn't because it would really screw up the mix. You can also take this in just a very creative sense too. You can take the mids and do some wacky stuff and take the highs and do some wacky stuff. There are no rules when it comes to this, but I thought let's hold off on mid side until the end because it's usually one of the more confusing topics that we're going to cover. Mainly because people don't understand what to do when you are working in mid-side, and that's because there are no right answers, but I know a lot of people have complained and said, well, I don't have a mid-side EQ. The EQ doesn't have that capability. Well, of course it has the capability. You just have to set it up so that you can use the EQ in a mid-side configuration, which based on what we've done here, we could very easily do. Don't forget, you could also use an FX layer and then make a couple of parallel chains if you want to keep it all on one track. I've already shown you that 2 other times, so I won't do it again. There's always a lot of possibilities. In the next video, we'll look at a device that comes inside of Bitwig that will help us do this and make it a little more transparent. So thank you so much for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.